Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Good morning, everybody. All right. All right, everything is in place. I'm going to grab more coffee. Hey, Martin and Chris. That's what I forgot, more coffee.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's...
Hey, Sue. Hey, Chris. Hey, Denise. And Timothy. Yeah, I'll be in and out, too, really. It's going to be a shorter one today. I got to give Ronnie a ride about 10:30. Hey, Gladys. Hey, Denise. Timothy. Gladys. Hey, Lisa, Susan, Luann, Karen, Boker Tov, Lisa. Hey, Bala. Morning, Kathleen. Morning, everybody. We can start in about 10 minutes properly. So if you're watching this later, go through it. Feel free to scroll through about 10 minutes. Hey, Amy. Hey, Casey. Morning, Kathleen. Christine, no, this is in Rose Hill, this particular picture. Hey, happy anniversary, Karen. 18, that's a good number for in Judaism. Hey, Teresa. Hey, Heather. Hey, Edwina. Christine, I'm sure there is. There's stuff like this all over the place. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Mary. Hey, Christine and Nancy. Good morning all around. Hey, Bridget and Mary. Thanks for those of you sharing this. That always helps me when people hit the share button. Especially those of you who are new around here and your friends haven't all seen you sharing it a million times. Hey, Natalie and Heather. Smona Yisrael. Numbers are so hard in Hebrew. I never get the numbers questions right because the numbers, there's genders for the numbers, which makes it even trickier. Hey, Marcia. So I never know if it's Israel or Israel. Stime, Snime, or Sny, or Sty. Could all be two. Hey, Laura. Hey, Lake Point Tower, all right, where Oprah did not live. It's about how many of us tour guides have said so over the years. Christina, I'm going to have to look that one up. I'm not sure if I've been to that or not. And if not, we need to go there for the morning mini tour one of these days. Hey, Daryl in Wisconsin. Hey, Octavio. A nice and damp and overcast here as well. This is Glumpy. He's just appeared on TikTok. Hey, Michael. I'll tell you all about Glumpy when we get started. It's going to be kind of a shorter tour today. I got to give Ronnie a ride. Well, these Sunday ones are very casual these days. I need to kind of keep them casual as the Hawk book is really occupying all of my headspace. It's so tricky. It's going to be really hard to put this together. Because it's about a 10-year story But within that 10 years, there's it really only gets, it changes a lot the last year. That's when Hawk starts acting like the Johann Hawk that we all recognize is only in the last year of the story, after he's caught. Okay, watch out, guys. I'm gonna wipe the screen a little bit. Huh. Foggy in Kansas City, perfect. When it's foggy out here, I want to rush to the cemeteries with the camera, get more footage for virtual tours, hopefully find the coyotes. Because, of course, cover the coyotes. Once a week, I put up a good cemetery coyote picture on the Patreon. The narrator of the Johann Hawk story? Might be Reverend Haas. Nah, he's kind of a bizarre presence. There's not really a reliable character who can connect all the way through. Benno Lechner knew her for part of it, but it takes place in different cities. He was under kind of different personas in different cities. Nobody was following him the whole time. Welcome along, Kathy. Yeah, on the Holmes and Hawk tier of the Patreon, you basically be able to follow the Hawk book as it is written. I'll probably, I've finished writing up all of his wives now. All 19 or so of his confirmed wives and all that we know about them. That comes to about 20,000 words. But there's no way I'm going to be able to take up 20,000 words telling the story in the final book. And I don't want this to be one of those creative license books where as Hawk crossed over the river, he thought of his old days in childhood on the Rhine River.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Who would play him in a movie? Jason Alexander, I can think of right off the top. He's a little old for it now. Hawk was only like 40. Of course, 40 then looked like 80 now. Morning, Carol. Morning all around, everybody. Hey, Vicky. I'm not sure where the cats are right now. Miles is over on the couch. Let's make sure we get his appearance covered here. His contractually obligated appearance. Miles. Here's Miles, everybody. Miles has to show up every single show. So this one's going to be a slightly shorter one than usual for a Sunday. We're going to work until I got to take Ronnie. Hey, Jackie. Oh, I got some news on Hawk. The microfilm reels I'd requested from the Library of Congress came into the Herald Washington, but only about half of them. I'd asked for January through June of 1905 from the New York American, thinking their May of 1905 might cover some of the missing stuff from Chicago, but they only sent me January through March, most of which I already had from last time I was in D.C. I did get to fill in some gaps of stuff that I missed in D.C., so it's good, but I got to call tomorrow and say, hey, they're going to send the rest? Please? They probably didn't rerun too much of the Chicago stuff. All right, we're going to let Benny do one more tune.
And they all loved it. They all loved those passages when they played by Benny Goodman. Now another one.
Hey, Christina, I don't go to D.C. much. When I do, it's usually working or to go to the Library of Congress to get stuff out of their microfilm room. Ronnie's just going to do a brunch thing. Give a shout out to my parents and grandmother watching out there, who in their county helped raise Warnock's vote total by 3% versus what he got in November. Which helped put him over the top, thank goodness. Hey, Lorena. We're letting Benny Goodman finish up one more tune live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Christine, if you're going to be a right-winger in here, you might as well just leave now, honestly. If you actually supported Herschel Walker, possibly the most embarrassing candidate that has ever been put forth, I recommend you just leave now. This just isn't going to be for you. Hey, Gene. Hey, Ann. Morning, Jacqueline. Hey, Ann. Good morning, Lisa. And Marita and Chris. Now, new people can't necessarily read the room. You go to a Chicago thing, people think it's going to be people saying Chicago's a hellhole or something. Or like so many of the Chicago history groups just descend into that pretty quick. Cop worshipping people. Morning, Grandma Bell. Hat for booty shorts. Yeah, I got a breaking news alert. Let me read you my breaking news alert from the other day. This is maybe the best breaking news alert I think I ever got, as a matter of fact. Breaking news. A species of armored dinosaur may have used a sledgehammer-like tail club to fight one another. Like, finally some news I can use. All right. Well, that's enough for Benny right now. It's time that we went ahead and got started. It's going to be a bit of a shorter one today anyway, so welcome along, ladies and gentlemen. Here's a tour that I haven't done in a long time, Relics of the Old City Cemetery. So I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide historian for about nearly 20 years now. Run the Adam Chicago Patreon, where we cover this stuff in a lot more detail and share some awesome pictures. Author of about 20 books, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Just Kill Me, a novel about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them. The Smart Alex Guide to American History, which took about 10 years but earned out its advance. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. And the brand new Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, new from University of Illinois Press. And today we're going to be covering a little bit of the Graceland stuff because we are going to be talking about the Old City Cemetery that we had here in Chicago. Now it's going to be a little bit shorter. Usually I like to go for about 40-45 minutes, then we hang out for a bit. Today I got to give my wife Ronnie a ride pretty quick. So we're just going to do kind of a shorter one today. But we're going to start with a little bit of history of churchyards in general. Now, in the 1830s, when Chicago was first really starting to grow, we realized pretty quickly that these old school churchyards weren't really going to work for us. And in the old days, people who died in large cities were usually buried in churchyards that got really overcrowded really, really quickly. Overcrowded, overgrown. Now, I've said many times, if you really want to lose your lunch, poke around, you can find this book from the 1830s or 1840s called Gatherings from Graveyards. It's a report on London sanitary conditions vis-a-vis the graveyards. Here's just from their table of contents. St. George's, burial grounds and vaults excessively crowded. Ebenezer Chapel, private ground excessively overcharged with dead. Sheen's Ground, a private burial place, attractive appearance of the surface, condition of the subsurface. Trinity Episcopal Church, burying ground overcrowded with dead, fees very low. Schoolroom for children over a shed for tools. Bunhill Fields, Resting place of John Bunyan, 100,000 bodies deposited here. St. Luke, some observations of the gravedigger. Clerkenwell, 4 burial grounds and vaults. The poor ground extremely crowded with the dead. A house in immediate vicinity occupied by a butcher. His disgusting content. I gotta read this again. The bodies exhumed and deposited in the slaughterhouse. And they wondered why they had such a problem with disease spreading. So Chicago decided, okay, we're going to be more progressive than this. Instead, we are going to be putting aside the grave burial grounds way, way out in the outskirts, which was a good idea. Now, here we got the Loop. If you look just above the Loop, a little to the left of Navy Pier, where you see that 875 North Michigan, that's about where the main first burial ground was. Right about where the water tower is now. There was another one right about where that metro station symbol is. And another one just above the river. We'll show a few of these spaces. One of them was right about where the water tower is, right on the lake. Every time there was a lot of wind, the sand, burying people in sand has come obvious problems. There was another one on the south side that would have been just below where the Prairie Avenue Historic District is now, like right about here. This is also about where the dead had fallen after the Battle of Fort Dearborn in 1812. Those bodies were just left there for a long time. There's only a couple of scattered reminiscences of what this was. Eventually they put like a skating pond there after they supposedly moved all of the bodies. And one of them that's even less known, I've got like 2 sentences worth of descriptions of this one. It's hard to figure out even when the timeline was, but right about where the merchandise mart is now, there was one. There may have been a burial there as late as 1858 when we had a mayoral election and an anti-voting mob killed a guy named Charles Seifert. There was a big funeral, and the description of it makes it sound like he was buried right about here. It might have been that they got on the train station right about here and went up to the Old City Cemetery, but really, this is just kind of a sample of the smaller ones. Christine asks, is it true that you only get a 100-year lease on your grave? Never heard of that. There are certain places that would sell term graves, but it depends cemetery to cemetery. But a lot of research was done on this by a woman named Helen Sclair, who is now buried at Bohemian National Cemetery and actually, in fact, lived at Bohemian National Cemetery in the last years of her life. They let her have the old caretaker's cottage. But according to her research, there were about 60 abandoned cemeteries around Chicago. About 60. Most of these would have been old things like family plots. And of course, the most famous is the one that they put aside after they realized this one by the water tower just wasn't going to cut it, which was the old one where Lincoln Park is today. Now, this one started in the 1840s. Burials were stopped here in the mid-1860s, and removals took place over about the next 10 years after that. This is a little note from when it was in place. Our city is greatly in need of a proper place in which to keep the dead bodies found in the streets and byways of the city. Almost every week a corpse is found, and no proper, decent, or safe place is provided for its reception. The cost of a proper building or vault would be very little, and they ended up putting this at about the south end of the park. Now, we do have only really one good drawing of what the old city cemetery looked like, and that is from when they were in the process of moving everything in 1871. This is a drawing from Harper's during the Great Chicago Fire. This was about as far up as the fire got, so a lot of people were sheltering in here. Whether there were really this many graves still floating around, it might have just been our artist's imagination. But it also does relatively tally with what the descriptions were like. At the time, there were definitely said to still be a lot of gravestones up, a lot of bits of coffins that had fallen apart when they were trying to move people. I even ran into one thing recently. They were moving a person about 1871, and the coffin fell apart, as they sometimes did, and they found that the person inside was upside down. The thing that they got was this was a cholera burial. Cholera, when you die of cholera, you kind of fall into a heavy sleep first. Just about every case I know of where they were about to bury someone and they sat back up, it was cholera. In this case, apparently they didn't sit back up in time soon enough. Now, there is one very vivid description of what the cemetery was like during the Great Chicago Fire, a graveyard on fire. Flames shot up from the resting places of the dead, the living fugitives screaming with horror made for a moment the ghastliest spectacle that ever fell upon living eyes. The receiving vault, which they finally had built, solidly built and shrouded in foliage, fell under the terrific flame, and the dead burst from their coffins as the fire tore through the walls of the frightful charnel house. The reception vault, the receiving vault, was still in use quite a long time after they stopped using City Cemetery for burials. Bodies would be stashed there before they took one to the new burial ground out in Jefferson Park. That was where they buried the unclaimed bodies in unmarked graves. So by this time, though, in the late 1850s, early 1860s, Graceland and Rose Hill opened up on the north side, so we had more proper burial places. Should you want to know more about the city cemetery itself, you're going to want to check out the Hidden Truths webpage by Pamela Banos. This was her dissertation project a while ago. She knows as much about City Cemetery as anybody does. I still need to talk to her a little bit more about the Merchandise Mart ones. I wrote her about that when I think she had it confused with McCormick Place when I was talking to her. But yeah, tons and tons of data about this. There's always more and more of it coming up. There's certain things that we can find now that we've got, now that more and more things are being digitized, stuff's being found in places we wouldn't have normally thought to look or wouldn't have been able to find without like skimming line by line. Now, the main relic that still stands in Lincoln Park, of course, is the Couch Tomb. This is the tomb of a guy by the name of Ira Couch. He was a hotel owner here in the city. We got some fantastic pictures. I just got some really good ones that I should have added in if I had time. There's a bit of a question. We don't really know how many people are inside of this one now. For some reason, it was never moved. There's a lot of stories about why, but the main reason is probably just money. Also, moving a mausoleum is very difficult to begin with. But the door on the outside of it today is not really a door. It's a strictly decorative slab. There, I'll show you the inside. Here's how you can see the inside. If you slide the Tomb Snooper 500 under the crack in the door, you can get at least a little bit of a look at what's on the other side of this. I don't think the slab has really been there all that long. So on the other side of the door is another door. But that became a subject of urban legends really very early on in Chicago. In the 1880s, there were stories that ghosts would come walking out in the middle of the night. 1911, there was a report coming that some locksmith had gotten an order to come open up the tomb. Huge crowd gathered around when this broke the news, but the whole thing was a prank. But that gave the city a chance to talk about it. The park director said, nope, there's nobody in there, hasn't been in years, all the bodies got moved to Rose Hill. Then the current Mr. Couch at the time said, no, none of the bodies have ever been moved out of there. There's about 6 of them in there. Even then, he wasn't exactly sure which 6. But the paperwork at Rose Hill generally backs him up. There's nothing in the Couch family plot at Rose Hill paperwork that indicates a person was ever put there. Now, I've looked and looked as to who might have been there. It was probably Ira himself plus his parents. And there were some stillborns in the family that never got listed in paperwork. They just come up in the probate record. This is like the undertaker's funeral from when Carol and Ira's wife died, years and years after he did. Probate had the receipt from the undertaker. They paid $80 for her coffin. Preparation of the remains cost $10. The hearse cost $5. The railroad ticket for the coffin cost $3.55. That's a lot, considering it wasn't going that far. 3 big chains, $4.50. 1 pair of gloves, $1.50. 1900 this was stamped. She outlived him by a good 40 years. But there was like an airship testimony in here that gave some indication of who might be inside of the tomb, but nothing really that solid. Now, this was not the only one left at the time. This is a picture of Rachel, Ira's great-great-great-granddaughter, who is still around. She shared her whole scrapbook with her stuff with me, and was very supportive of my efforts to see what's behind it. Though there's a general sense among the family, now and then the family has thought about doing the paperwork and seeing what needs to be done to get the thing open. But there's a lot of red tape involved with it, and there's a general sense that if we ever do open it and see inside, it's just going to take all of the fun out of it. Really, we're probably not going to see that much in there anyway. Most stuff would have rotted away a long time ago. To move up a little bit here, there was also the family of Mr. Elijah Peacock, the first jeweler in Chicago, was initially interred there. That's about all you could see of it left as of 1900. At one point, there was also a vault that went into a hillside that a bear escaped from the Lincoln Park Zoo and got stuck in at one point, about the 1880s. Elijah Peacock, again, was Chicago's first jeweler. He was eventually moved. His family now has an obelisk up at Oakwood Cemetery, down at Oakwood Cemetery, I should say. You can see these dates here. Burials didn't start at Oakwoods until the mid-1860s. So these would have been about 15 years before that. There's also one marker that's kind of the burial space observed of a guy by the name of David Kennison. Now, David Kennison in the early 1850s was telling everybody that he was 115 years old and the last survivor of the Boston Tea Party. He even had a vial of tea leaves that he gave to Fernando Jones to give to the Chicago History Museum. They've still got him, even though we now know beyond a doubt the guy was lying through his teeth. I think people at the time knew it as well. I mean, nobody. Can't imagine people really, honest to God, in their hearts believed this guy was 115. But they liked having a Revolutionary War hero around. And plus, he may have been a con artist, but he used his powers for good. He would speak at abolitionist and free soil meetings all the time. There's even a thing in his pension file, though, they're saying, don't listen to a word this guy says. And it kind of charts out how in 1818 he was 36 years old. Then suddenly by 1820 he was 79. That's a lot of aging in just a couple of years. Most people can't do that. Really very impressive feat. But years after his burial here at the Old City Cemetery in 1855, people like Fernando Jones got together and said, isn't it a shame that there's no monument to him? I know the body was never moved. It makes us look unpatriotic. So they put their heads together and pinpointed this as about the location where he might have been buried and had a memorial boulder put up. But later research, like what Pamela's research indicated, that he's actually kind of by the couch tomb. So this is kind of his burial place observed. And yeah, yeah, people don't really get obelisks anymore. After Sigmund Freud, it's harder to justify them. But relics of the Old City Cemetery do show up all over in Graceland Cemetery and Rose Hill Cemetery, some in Oak Woods as well. Just walking around, you can see, one of the big rumors is that here at Graceland Cemetery, there's always been a rumor that it was lined with headstones from the Old City Cemetery. And some of what they're using to line the place is clearly old gravestones. These are gravestones that have been replaced. And that's a very common thing when a gravestone gets modernized or replaced or somebody gets moved and they get a new headstone. They use the old rubble for things like ripraps on the shores of rivers, or in this case around here. This one is dated well after the Old City Cemetery. There's also been particularly strong rumors that the rubble wall up in the northeast section over by Mary Hawk and Captain Streeter's down right over here, this rubble wall is sometimes said to be Old City Cemetery relics. And some of it, in fact, actually is. So you can move around up over here. I don't know if they're from the Old City Cemetery. They're probably not Old City Cemetery. But you can see little bits of coping, little things that have been carved out. And every now and then, if you look really closely, you can even make out a couple of words. Like right down there, you can see it used to say "Asleep in Jesus" carved onto there. But yeah, wasn't a gravestone wall. There's a lot of really old cemeteries that just kind of have the old ones that have fallen apart just put on a wall, like Colonial Cemetery in Savannah. That's not really what they're doing here. These are ones that have been replaced, ones that have been damaged, and just kind of being used for structure. You see it all over, like in the Bellevue section. The place we call Pride Rock, where the coyotes like to hang out. Some of that is old, like coping, the curbing that used to be around more family plots back when that was more the rage. Another guy that may be from even older than the Old City Cemetery. Up over here, this is John Kinsey, who's got War of 1812 insignia, even though he may have committed some light treason. John Kinsey was taught, a whole generation of Chicagoans were taught that this guy was the founder of Chicago. He was honestly not. He was one of the first non-native settlers to live here, not by any means the first. His daughter-in-law was just a really big social climber. But he is actually engraved number 4. He was initially buried in a family plot. Then they moved him to the one about where the water tower is now. Then they moved him to Lincoln Park. And then in the 1870s, he was moved here. And we can actually see, kind of trace it out here. He would have been moved here. What are the dates on this? The interment dates. 1865. 1865, they moved the Kinsey family plot from the Old City Cemetery to here. John H. Kinsey, his son, had only just died like 5 months ago, so he wasn't there very long. John himself had died back in 1828, plus there's all of these unnamed Kinseys. These are probably children who died within the first couple of days of their lives. There's also a couple that I think lived a bit older than that. They just didn't happen to have the records at the cemetery the day that they filled this out. John Kinsey might be the oldest person in the earliest person to have died. He's definitely not the oldest person in the cemetery. There were people who were born before he was in 1768. But he might be the earliest, the first person to die who is now in the cemetery. I say might because there's some indication otherwise, like at the M.O. Walker plot here. Now these ones, some of these older graves might have been moved from the Old City Cemetery. Very rarely can we actually tell that something was properly moved, because they could have just made a new one. They don't really fill out paperwork one way or the other. But over here, among M.O. Walker, the Stagecoach King of the West, we've got several people here over on the side who died as early as 1815, 1829, and even in these cases, 1842, 1815, Livonia Walker is the earliest date of death I think I have come across here at here at Graceland Cemetery, and that's a good 45 years before burial started at the cemetery. Now, according to the lot record, it actually is the remains actually are there. It's mentioned in the interment data, but it's really hard for me to imagine. I mean, Walker didn't even come to Chicago until years and years after 1815, so by the time he moved, in fact, there probably wouldn't really have been anything left to move. More likely, I would say they moved a stone for her or something. Maybe. Let's keep looking around a little bit here. Perhaps the most famous Old City Cemetery marker that is now at Rose Hill is Francis Pierce Stone. This is a statue built back in the 1850s. H.O. Stone was a mortgage guy in Chicago. There's drawings of him from his company riding around in a coonskin cap, hanging out outside of the Sauganash Hotel, which was nowhere near Sauganash. This is a sculpture by C.B. Ives. When he was about 40, he went back to his hometown in upstate New York and met Frances, who was about 16. Married her and took her back. At the time, that just didn't freak anybody out. She gave birth to their daughter, then promptly died of tuberculosis. The daughter died a few months later, and Stone went over to Europe to grieve, hired C.B. Ives, the sculptor, to make this. And this may be the second version of it. There's a couple of articles from his lifetime saying that the first one sank on the way over across the Atlantic. It led to kind of an urban legend that the original had been sunk on the Lusitania, which doesn't make any sense timeline-wise. But there are some things from within Stone's own lifetime. He then went back to upstate New York and found another woman to marry, who ended up living right where that Prairie Avenue cemetery was. He got older and older. His bride stayed the same age. She outlived him by several decades and was known as a very stern, old-fashioned old lady around the neighborhood. Now, right back behind that, there are a few really older ones that were probably moved. These are some of the other Stone family. You can see the death of like 1839. A couple of them that I can't quite read because I couldn't move everything out of the way. Like his father, Ebenezer Stone, his father is there. His mother is nearby that. And in this case, there actually is a picture of how it looked before they added the glass. This is an undated photo that goes around. But this we know was in the Old City Cemetery. It was even a little bit of a tourist attraction at the time. Exactly when they removed the fence, exactly when they added the glass case over it, is not really known, but it must have been fairly early, I would think, just because the statue is in such good shape today. This thing wouldn't have lasted too many Chicago winters. Though it's worse now that we've got like acid rain and stuff, but it's not like pollution wasn't a problem back then. It's just way up in Rose Hill. That would have been about the middle of nowhere at the time. There's over here, there's also Levy Boone, member of the Know Nothing Party, who was mayor of Chicago. After the Kansas-Nebraska Act, both parties split up. All of a sudden, which party you were a member of didn't really matter so much as just whether you were pro or anti-Nebraska. So Levy Boone became a member of the Know Nothing Party, which was fiercely anti-immigrant. He blamed immigrants for cholera, which, as a doctor, he should have really known better. But nobody really knew how cholera spread at the time. But back behind this one, this is where it gets interesting. Is back behind that plot are some of the oldest graves that I have seen here at the Old City Cemetery, or here at Rose Hill Cemetery. These ones might even be too old to be Old City Cemetery graves. And usually the really old ones you find about like this. That one died 1845. That might very well have been someplace else. Might have been an old family plot. This one here, you really couldn't read that well that day. If you scrape it up, it looks like, yeah, died 1839. That's about 3 years before burials began at the Old City Cemetery. I'm getting the word that I'm running short on time here, so I can go places. So I gotta go places. I'm gonna cover one of the other ones. This is a really nice one, quite lightly carved by Edwin Burkhart, who was known for his angel statues and angel carvings at the Old City Cemetery. This is Jeanette Coe, the wife of Dr. M.D. Coe, who died in 1849. That's about 10 years before burials actually started here at Graceland. Now, if it's 1849, you can usually guess that it was probably cholera. We had really bad cholera waves in 1832, 1849, 1854, and 1866. By 66, Graceland was already up and running, but if you look down like the interment book for October of 1866, the cause of death is just cholera, 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 cholera. 1849, a solid couple percent of the citizens of Chicago died of cholera. They didn't really know how it spread in those days, but that's a whole other tour. Now, incidentally, we don't know much about Jeanette herself. I do know about her husband, Dr. M.D. Coe, who is next to her here. Dr. M.D. Coe, we also know just a little bit about from speeches and talks he gave at medical conferences. There was one case he told about where he had a patient, a woman who was subject to spontaneous urination. Anytime somebody touched her stomach, she would spontaneously urinate. He diagnosed it as hysteria, very 19th century thing to do, and said that he cured it with cannabis. Medical marijuana back before it was cool. And since we're talking about cholera waves of the 1840s and 1850s, I'm going to move over here. Christine, almost nobody was actually turned away at Ellis Island. That's a modern myth. There were basically no restrictions on immigration in those days. People who say, well, my family did it the right way. Your family didn't do anything that somebody today doesn't. All right, here we've got Jeremiah. Oh, I'm moving a little bit off here. I meant to show this one. Yeah, cholera spread by eating infected fecal matter. They just didn't understand that yet. But here was Jeremiah Price, known as the most boring man in town. People were still making fun of him about 50 years later. But Jeremiah Price came to see his pharmacist, and the pharmacist said, well, Jerry, what is the problem? And he said, I have quite a diarrhea. And the pharmacist said, well, that's the first symptom of cholera. This is 1854. People are dropping like flies. You should really get to see a doctor. And Price said, no, I'll just take some peppermint lozenges, please. Possibly added in something like, I did my own research. He was found dead the next morning with $20,000 in cash and securities strapped to his body as though he were trying to take it with him. You can't do that. Nor does peppermint lozenges cure cholera. Since my book came out, people have started leaving him peppermint lozenges. Just across from him is LCP Freer, who was his lawyer, and eventually got leave from the judge to have his body moved from the Old City Cemetery here to Graceland in the 1870s. It took decades to go through his probate. He didn't have any friends, he didn't have any family. Going through his probate took literally, this was like 20 years into it that they finally moved the body. I don't imagine anybody ended up getting much money by the end of it. There wouldn't have been anything left after the lawyers got paid. But just up the hill from him is LCP Freer's legal partner, who also died in the 1854 cholera wave. Always worth talking about, a guy named James H. Collins, who was very well known at the time, but bizarrely I have not even been able to find a drawing of James H. Collins. But Freer and Collins were best known for their work as abolitionists. There was a tight-knit group of abolitionist lawyers in Chicago at the time. They were among the most notable of them. LCP Freer lived longer than most of them, so he told more stories than the others. Collins was known as particularly combative about it. He would run as a third-party candidate for the Liberty Party. Also was the lawyer on one of Chicago's first known murder trials, of which the details are really not well recorded. But then, in the 1840s, there was a time when he and Freer had helped a couple of guys escape after they'd been arrested by Henry Rhines, a cop in Chicago who felt like his main duty was just to arrest people he thought might be fugitives. Collins had a thing out in the paper the next day saying, if you ever see a police officer in this city attempting to arrest a fugitive slave, it's okay to shoot that cop. Because they have no authority to do that around here, so all they're doing is kidnapping. Kidnappers are not really subject to protections of the law. It's generally thought he would have ended up being a Civil War general, but in 1854 he died in the same cholera wave that cut down Jeremiah Price. And as I mentioned, this is just going to be a shorter tour today, so we're going to clip right ahead. I got to give my wife a ride in a minute. Let me move this up. We don't really have anything, don't have anything upcoming, but I'll add something for Thursday night really soon. So for just a minute here, we will hang out and listen to some more Benny Goodman. Now, Casey, I don't know about being a peppermint supplier. I don't know if anybody else had that idea that you could just take a peppermint lozenge. Now, Christine, when I read 1850s newspapers, I become a Republican immediately. It was a very different situation back then. When I read modern papers, I quickly switch back over. It's not that hard. If you read 1850s Democratic papers, they sound exactly like Fox News, only more big words. Let's go see Miles again. Oh, here's Priya, in fact. Miles has gone someplace else, so here's Priya for you. Miles fulfilled his contract back before the tour started. Yeah, there's our girl. She'll be turning 2 in a couple of months. She is just a little purr box these days. All right. Now, Priya's not 2 yet. She will be in a couple of months. Turn this one on, that bright light. Susan, we'll probably do our annual Home Alone house pilgrimage this week. Maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. Probably not Tuesday. I got a radio thing Tuesday.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now,
yeah, in-person tours, I'll see you next year. Do I have pictures of Miles as a kitten? I got quite a few pictures of Miles as a kitten. And Miles showed up before the tour, so he's filled out his contract. Adam, apparently I keep getting radio gigs. So... So we might as well replace that with this. I've only got a minute or so before I gotta get moving. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Gail. I wish we could make this a longer one. I could probably do a whole part 2 of it. There's a lot more things on the deck. But I needed a quick one today. Oh, what I'm doing here is kind of like a new kind of radio. Sorry, I gotta make it a quick one today.
Down Holloway, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Waters.
Christine, I'm in the 50th Ward. But I may just spend this afternoon, curling up with a good book about rotting human remains, open pits of gunk and effluvia, bones coming up out of the ground. Just heard Ronnie saying "ew" in the background there. Hey, Ronnie, you want to come say hi before we go? All right, Ronnie has consented to say hello before we take off. Just a quick one, we get a cameo from Ronnie today. Hey, everybody. My wife, Ronnie, most of you know her. Oh, and this, while we're here, this is my favorite Christmas story. Glumpy, the elf who got drunk and sawed his leg off. You can see my song on TikTok. We Jews wrote most of your Christmas carols, you know. But all right, ladies and gentlemen. Dancing in Harlem now. They started trucking. We gotta be trucking. We gotta be checking on down the line. So thanks a lot for joining us, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you got to stay spooky. Bye, everybody.